Okay, so today we're starting with 9.6, which is our second last spread for chapter 9. And last class, if you remember, we were looking at this topic of development in infancy. So how does an infant develop from the ages of 0 to 2 years old? So today we're going to kind of extend upon our knowledge of development. Now we're looking at development in early childhood. So early childhood is like, the early years of life, after the age of 2 to about the age of maybe 7 or 8 years old. So basically looking at how the development across those four areas of development essentially progresses, and essentially what the child shows in each of these areas. So we're going to look at how does a child develop in terms of physical development, how does a child develop intellectually, emotionally, and socially. So remember, whenever a question asks you to discuss something in terms of an area of development, or even just in terms of development, you have to be referencing the 4 areas of development, which are your physical, intellectual, emotional, social. Just be careful with the terminology. Don't get confused between areas of development, which are the pies, and the dimensions of health and well-being, which is your PMES, okay? Just be careful when you're reading questions so you don't answer it in a wrong way. Alrighty, and obviously in our upcoming SAC, we will be asking you questions where you will have to link to both dimensions of health and well-being as well as areas of development. So again, that's why I'm telling you guys, and I'm stressing this a lot, that be careful when you're reading the question, okay? In past SACs as well, and even in, in past SACs and past assessments, some of you don't read the question properly still. So if it asks you, for example, for 2 food sources of a particular nutrient, you might only give 1. So I don't know whether you just didn't read the question properly or whether you just didn't know the second one, but read the question properly and make sure that you are answering everything that it requires. Alrighty, so that's essentially what we're covering today. So first of all, how do children between the ages of about 2 to 6 or 7 years old, how do they essentially develop physically? Now we have to remember that when we were looking at infants weren't showing a lot of physical development in the sense of, being able to go ride their bikes around the neighborhood and stuff like that, but they were showing physical development in terms of their growth. They were getting a little bit more heavier. They were growing a little bit. They were able to crawl around. They were slowly able to walk. Okay, now the physical development in infancy was a little bit more rapid, but in early childhood the development physically, or from a physical point of view, is slow but steady. And what that means is that because the child already knows how to walk, they already have those basic skills. From there, the development doesn't actually occur in a very rapid way. It just kind of occurs steadily and slowly. Okay, so just remember, early childhood is between the ages of 2 to 6 years old. So that's essentially the age group we're focusing on for all the types of development today. Okay, so what do children between the ages of 2 to 6 experience from a physical point of view? And remember, if we're ever going to ask you to explain how a child develops in terms of physical development, you could name any one of these things on the slide. So you could say that the child continues to increase in their weight or continues to increase in their height. You could say that their bones continue to lengthen, which essentially means that they're getting taller and they're growing. The bones continue to ossify. Ossify is a fancy way of saying that they start to mineralize more. They start to get more strengthened and hardened and established. Okay, and essentially they're able to support the child's ever-growing weight. So as the child gets older and starts gaining more weight, the child's bones and skeleton is able to support that child's weight. Now, the child's overall body fat percentages would decrease. Okay, so even though we say that as a child gets older, their weight increases, the actual body fat percentage decreases. And what that means is that essentially if you've had if you've got little siblings, you might remember that when they were really young, they were really chubby, they had so much baby fat. But as they got older and older, you'd realize that they started to lose that baby fat. And them losing that baby fat is an indicator that their body fat percentages were decreasing. Body fat percentage is what proportion of body fat you have with reference to your entire weight, okay? Now, obviously, when we're talking about teeth, children's first set of teeth are complete. Obviously, these are still baby teeth. So as they get older, they'll start to lose those baby teeth and the baby teeth will be replaced by more permanent teeth. But whenever we talk about teeth are a part of the body, and for that reason, we put that under physical development. The large muscle groups continue to grow in size, so the child's ability to kick, jump, throw things, all that kind of stuff like hop on a leg, skip, all that kind of stuff is gross motor skills. Okay, they use the large muscle groups. Even at their ability to climb up a particular object, or, you know, climb up a tree, all that kind of stuff basically is something they're able to do. Fine motor skills also become increased in this stage. So we're talking about those finer skills of being able to, for example, zip up clothes, being able to use scissors, being able to write with a pen or a texter. Those are fine motor skills because they require the more smaller muscle groups. Okay, like the muscles or the, you know, the joints in the fingers and that kind of stuff. Now, the general motor coordination is also a lot better from the ages of 2 to 6. So you compare, for example, a 1-year-old child who's an infant, a 1-year-old infant who can barely stand up and balance and walk, compared to a child who's maybe 5 or 6 years old who is able to not only walk but skip, not only skip but even play something like hopscotch where they're just, you know, jumping on one leg. So that's essentially showing you that children who are between the ages of 2 to 6 years old have better motor coordination, have a better sense of balance compared to infants who are like 0 to 2 years old. Okay, so that's essentially some examples. Now, you've got so many examples on this page. As I mentioned, it's just more than enough if you just learn any two. Okay, so any two of these physical development changes as a child moves into early childhood, that is essentially what the physical development changes are. So just learn any two and that should be more than enough. The next one that we're looking at is intellectual development. So intellectual development, remember, it's all about the brain, okay? Intellectual is, when you say someone is an intellectual, we usually think of them as being someone who's quite smart, someone who's quite well studied, who's well learned, who's actually, you know, done a lot of academics maybe, okay? Or there's someone who is very well aware of what's happening around them. So that's essentially what an intellectual is. So intellectual development is basically this idea that between the ages of 2 to 6 years old, which is essentially what early childhood is about, or the age range for early childhood, between the ages of 2 to 6 years old, we are seeing rapid intellectual development in children, okay? Children are starting to learn new words, okay? When they were infants, they were barely able to speak, but now they're able to learn new words. We also need to remember that between the ages of 2 to 6 years old, the child will usually start kindergarten and they will usually begin school. Okay, so they're learning new words at school, they're learning new words at home. Because they're learning these new words and speaking with adults, you know, adults are delighted. Okay, adults are like trying to speak with them more and they're really trying to encourage the kid to speak more as well. So essentially, as a result of that environment that they're growing up in, going to school, the child's intellectual development automatically starts to get increased or essentially start to get better. Okay, the child will also start to ask so many questions about the world around them. So, you know, if you've got a little brother or a little sister, you might realize that when they were between the ages of 2 to 6, they were asking so many questions. They were so interested in everything and they wanted to learn. Okay, if you ever go to a primary school classroom, you know, a grade prep or grade 1 classroom, you realize they're just so absorbed in their learning all the time. And that is, again, showing you that they are really kind of motivated to learn new things, okay? And that motivation to learn new things promotes intellectual development even more as well. Okay, so children's attention span also becomes longer. They're able to focus on one thing. So if a teacher in a prep classroom, for example, says, okay, guys, you need to focus on what I'm saying now, and we're gonna, you know, until I tell you guys to go back to your seats, the kids will actually sit down on the floor or on the mat and they will listen to the teacher for that entire time. Okay, the knowledge of words also increases. So kids learn that there are, you know, different words for different things. So rather than just referring to, you know, a ball as a ball, they might refer to it as a soccer ball or a basketball. So they learn more specific words. Children are able to follow basic instructions and remember those instructions. So if the teacher says, okay, after we finish reading the story, I want everyone to, you know, go back to your desks and get your recess out of your bag. The kids will remember that and they will do that, essentially. Now, in the first years of early childhood, the child can classify objects based on color, for example, just one aspect. They're not able to focus on many different aspects. So if the mum says, can you bring me all the green M&Ms, the child will usually get the green M&Ms from the bag and give it to the mum. So they're able to differentiate between objects based on things like color or size or shape. And obviously in this lifespan stage between the ages of 2 to 6, like we said, kids are going to school, kids are being exposed to more resources like books that their teachers read to them in class. They can borrow books from the school library, and they can learn new numbers using those flashcards or counters and that kind of stuff. So they are essentially learning new skills like being able to read, being able to count, and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of setting the foundation for them to be able to later solve more complicated problems as they get older. Okay, so this is the intellectual development, and just quite a few examples on this slide, but again, you just need to know at least 2 examples. Okay, this is for early childhood. All right, so the next type of development that we see children going through is emotional development. Now, emotional development tends to occur quite rapidly. And essentially with emotional development, it occurs rapidly because the child is going through so many social experiences, okay? And social experiences can impact the child's emotional development. So going to school, and getting into trouble for something that someone else did, that affects the ability to which a child is able to show their emotions. So essentially, the child will mature in their emotional development as they get older. So you might notice that little kids, they love to dob on each other. They love to, they love to get other kids in trouble sometimes. If they're not happy with how another kid has treated them, they'll say it to their face. They might say, "You made me angry today," or they might even approach their parents and say, "Mommy, you made me sad." As they get older, the kids are obviously better at, kids are better at hiding those emotions, okay? But between the ages of 2 to 6, generally, especially in the younger age, so maybe 2, 3 or 4 years old, children don't hide their emotions as much. But as they get to maybe 6 years old or 5 years old, they start school, they realize that sometimes it's actually better to hide your emotions. Okay, and an example of that might be that if the child starts crying in class and the teacher starts questioning them and asking, "Are you okay? What's happening?" and the child gets a bit intimidated by that, they might learn that in the future it's better to just hide my emotions and not make a big scene in class. Okay, a child's ways of dealing with emotions is still immature. So if, for example, this boy is angry at this boy for taking something of his, he might actually hit him or punch him or smack him. Okay, so that's like the way that he deals with his emotions. Obviously, when children get older or as they get older, they're able to express their emotions in a little bit more of a mature way, in a less violent way. Okay, children also start to begin to show more complex emotions, like emotions such as jealousy, okay, which we did cover in chapter 7. So jealousy, envy, okay, all those things start to come up, and those are more complex emotions compared to things like simple emotions like happiness or sadness. So children within the ages of 2 to 6 years old will generally start to show these emotions as well. In terms of emotional development, children also start to develop an identity, okay? They start to see that they are separate from other people. They start to understand that, okay, I'm not only a student in my class, but I'm also a brother to my siblings. I'm also a son. I'm also, a friend to somebody. So essentially, they start to understand that they're not just one person. They don't just have one role, but that they have other different roles as well. And they start to associate themselves with other things. So if this boy takes this boy's toy, he might say, "That's my toy, that belongs to me." Okay, so they start to understand that there are things that belong to them and that essentially they have ownership of those things. And the last thing with emotional development is that children's moods can change very quickly during the early childhood stage. So between the ages of 2 to 6, you'll notice that children's moods are very unpredictable, and it's very hard to actually determine what kind of a mood a child is going to show or how a child is going to react to a certain thing happening or a situation. Okay, so sometimes you might notice that the child falls down and they start crying, but then the next minute they're happy again. So it's like, the child kind of is not able to control their emotions to some extent, but as they get older, the ability to control their emotions also gets better. Okay, so that's emotional development. And as I said with the previous slides, you just got to know at least 2 examples from this slide of how emotional development changes in early childhood between the ages of 2 to 6 years old. And the last development we're going through is social development. So like I said, at the beginning, children between the ages of 2 to 6, they are exploring different social contexts. Now, if we compare this with infants who are from the ages of 0 to 2, we said that the only social environment the infant has is at home. Okay, they're sitting in their high chair or they're crawling around the house. But between the ages of 2 to 6, most children will start playgroup, or they'll start kindergarten, or they'll start school. So essentially they are being exposed to more social environments, not just being stuck at home with their mum, but basically being able to explore different social contexts. And with those exploration of different social contexts, we have a higher amount of social development as well. Okay, so still the family is a main source of social support. So we can't say that the child just disconnects from the family altogether. It's still an important source of social support because the child is still dependent on the family for everything. But the child does begin to participate in other social activities and outings, okay? So because they're obviously able to carry things now, they can do more than just crawl around the house. The family might ask them to help with simple tasks like putting away groceries, okay? They might have important roles at certain social functions, okay? So all that kind of stuff. Because children can talk between the ages of 2 to 6 years old in early childhood stage, they also start to understand how to interact with others in a better way. And children are very smart in this way, in the sense that they understand that sometimes certain ways of interacting with other people don't work. So they have to actually, for example, when speaking to their dad, if they want something and they know their dad, they know that their dad has a kind of soft spot for them, they might speak in a really kind of cutesy kind of voice to get what they want, because they know that their dad won't say no to them, okay, if they use that little cutesy voice, okay? So certain ways of communicating with certain people is something that they develop an insight into doing, and they learn that they can manipulate certain situations by changing their voice, or by putting a little cute face on, or by asking in a certain way, okay? So the complexity with which they socially interact with other people actually increases. Obviously, they do attend playgroup, kindergarten, or school usually in this age, so they understand how to share toys, how to share books. Okay, they understand that if another child is talking to the kindergarten teacher, that they can't interrupt, that they have to be quiet and wait until that student has finished speaking, and then it's their turn to speak afterwards. So they understand those basic social skills. Okay. Now, as the child gets used to spending short periods of time away from the family, the child also starts to become more independent. So you notice on the first day of grade prep, for most kids, they don't want to leave their parents. They're really, really upset. But eventually they start to like going to school, and they actually don't want to take a day off school. In fact, that's something really funny that I learned, that a lot of the time with prep kids, especially now with this whole e-learning period, prep kids are actually really depressed that they're not able to go to school. And that's because they actually love going to school. They love that social environment, not just for meeting their friends, as we see with older students, but actually to go there to learn, to learn new things, to ask their teacher new questions. Okay, and I feel like this is something that is in line with the social development of children who are aged 2 to 6 years old. Okay, the child also wants to do things for themselves, so they don't want their mum and dad to be on their hand and foot. They want to wear the dress themselves. Like, mum, I can wear the dress myself, or can I wear the shirt myself today, mum? So essentially they start to want to be more independent, and that is normal. That's a normal part of their social development as a social being. Many social skills are learned about sharing and taking turns through play. So play is a very, very important thing that we need to remember, that play, basically the child's ability to play with toys or to play with other children, is something that affects almost all the dimensions, or all the areas of development. Okay, by playing, the child is able to improve their physical development. Okay, they're able to improve their intellectual development of how to manipulate objects or operate certain things. They're able to promote their emotional development, because by sharing toys, they're able to sometimes express emotions like happiness. If a child is happy with their friend, or if a child is pleased with the way that someone else is treating them, they might give them their toy. They might be like, here, you can take it. Okay, and social development, obviously, because when children play together, they form new friendships and they form new positive social connections there. Whether it's they're playing with their family friends, or their siblings, or their cousins, or people at the kindergarten, they're still developing some kind of social development there. So play is a very important thing. And it's important for you to understand that it's one of those behaviors that children engage in that affect all four areas of development. Okay. And we could even say that it affects all four dimensions of health and well-being as well. And it's very easy to make those links to what health and well-being as well. But because we're talking about children here, we're specifically focusing on the areas of development there. Right, so that's essentially something I just wanted to point out. And yeah, children learn social behaviors as well. For example, things like manners, they start to understand that I can't just shove food into my mouth like I did when I was 3 years old and people are still going to think it's cute. They start to learn that they have to eat with a knife and a fork, or they have to eat in the culturally acceptable way. Whatever culture they're from, obviously. Now, children at this age obviously like to be accepted by others, and so they are more likely to show good manners at the table. So if, for example, they're sitting politely at the table and the mum's like, wow, you're being such a good girl today, I'm really proud of you. They love that acceptance. Oh my God, children love to be praised. Like if you're ever dealing with a child who's between the ages of 2 to 6 and they don't seem like they're really kind of like gelling well with you, or they don't really seem like they like you, just start praising them, or just start being like asking them questions about their life, because children in this stage are very egocentric. And we learned about this in psychology with Piaget's theory, but they love to be asked things about themselves, and they love to be praised. They love to be accepted, essentially. Okay, and they obviously love to show off and seek attention at any point in time. So that's essentially another example of social development. And I've already talked about play. Play is obviously very important for social development. Play itself is more advanced in early childhood compared to infancy, simply because the child now has friends that they can play with, usually at kindergarten or school. They're able to interact better with their family in order to get their family to play with them. Or children in this stage are very good at imagining things, at visualizing things. So some children actually, even if they're alone in their room, they might create an imaginary friend, or they might pretend that some of their toys, are actually alive, and they might pretend that they're just playing with them. Okay, and that is totally normal for this stage of early childhood. So that's essentially just some examples there, quite a few, actually a lot of examples for social development. Again, just learn any two that are easy for you to remember, and that should be more than enough. I'm right with this thing, more than enough for the actual SAC. All right, so that basically brings us, I'm pretty sure that brings us to the end of, let me just double check. Yeah, that brings us to the end of today's spread.